All right, folks. Somewhat of a light crowd, second day, that's all right. We're going to go ahead and get started since we've got about 30 minutes here. But welcome to day 2 of CF Summit. I'm Dustin Bennett. I'm currently Director in Supply Chain Engineering at Wayfair, which if you're not familiar, Wayfair is a home decor, home furnishing retailer. We have operations in headquarters in Boston as well as Berlin. We operate in Germany, UK, and throughout North America. The problems that we work on are generally large parcel, large package delivery, so moving couches, tables, and things like that. And I manage software teams that deliver software. I'm also an ambassador for Cloud Foundry. I was previously at Home Depot as of about a year and a half ago, so we were one of the largest users of Cloud Foundry at the time. I ran the application platform and developer tools group there, so that's how I initially got involved in the Cloud Foundry community. I've also done a number of applications myself, both in the context of work at Home Depot and just personally hobbyist now on Cloud Foundry.
And hi, I'm Brittany Coulson. I most recently was the Director of Cloud Messaging for across Dell Technologies. I've also worked at Google Cloud, stints in Pivotal, as well as VMware. So for about the last 12 years, I've really been helping enterprise companies look across their application portfolios and try to figure out how they're going to move these applications to whether it be a public cloud or figure out kind of what their cloud or multi-cloud kind of strategy will be. So today we are going to look across a couple of different things, but mainly we're going to put this in the context of a CIO, Ingrid, right? So Ingrid really needs some help. She runs a company. We're going to call this company Acme. And in this company, she has, several developers, but all of them are a little bit new to Cloud Foundry. She really needs a lot of help in how to move specific applications and which applications to move, as well as figuring out where to put them. So we're going to break this down for Ingrid in a couple of different ways over the course of the next 30 minutes. And please, if you guys have any questions, let us know. But first, we're going to talk about app versus container runtimes, which applications to put in which place and why. Then we're going to get into a little bit more of a deeper dive on moving legacy applications, what things you should look for, how you should look across your application portfolios. And last but not least, we're going to talk about really building that momentum towards bringing Cloud Foundry into your organization. So how to leverage that community and really what steps you should take to really further this. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Dustin.
All right, so first we're going to talk about application and container runtimes. We're going to talk about a representative application. Let's say Ingrid at Acme is responsible for factory operations, so manufacture of widgets that come off an assembly line. We have a suite of applications that go into driving and facilitating the production in the facilities. We're going to try to look at the landscape and see what might be a good target to put into which runtime on Cloud Foundry. So first, just to give you an overview of the application and container runtime. So the app runtime, you're interacting with the cloud controller. So this is your typical CF push, CF scale, all the CF, et cetera, command line events that we're all used to. Makes it super easy for developers. You abstract the internals of your infrastructure away, and you just have to think about the code and the business value and functions that you're building. When we take a look at the container runtime, you interact more directly with Kubernetes. You have to think about your infrastructure as well as your code, and you are afforded a bit more control over the internals if you do need those for tighter control of the operating systems or middleware that are operating within your container rather than just going straight build pack deploys. So as I mentioned, the application runtime focuses really around the CF push, which makes it super lightweight, super easy for developers to get code into production. That's generally true once you have everything kind of set up. If you've done much CF pushing or unraveled that ball of yarn, you end up having to, as your applications grow and get more complicated, you also have manifest files that go along with the push, and typically some level of build pipeline automation for tests and whatnot. But it's fairly easy and straightforward once you have all that scaffolding in place to just push your code, the platform takes care of it, and you don't have to think about much else once it's running. Container Runtime also has a relatively simple command line to get your application running. This has some other assumptions similar to CF push, as you have a manifest file, potentially build pipelines and tests running. With kubectl run, you have to have your image already built, so whether that's your Docker image, et cetera, typically uploaded to an image registry, and once you're ready to run, you can run the command line and it will deploy and run the image for you. Looking under the hood a little bit more as well, we're making some assumptions with CF push that you've got existing infrastructure and configurations done. So you have your orgs and spaces set up, you've got all of your quota management, all of your permission management for your users that are actually running on your platform. So in Ingrid's case at Acme, this is probably going to be her Cloud Foundry operations team that's taking care of a lot of that information, trying to make those, the modules and org and space organization as self-service for the developer community as she can. Same thing with kubectl run. As I mentioned, you also have to predefine your package. There's a bit more manifest files and infrastructure as code associated with running this in the container runtime versus the application runtime. So in both of them, you obviously have big considerations around networking, permissions, and security, right? So any of us who have dealt with those things may know that those are generally a headache. A lot of the networking issues are managed at the layer of the platform itself. So as individual applications teams, you don't have to worry as much about that, but you still have to make sure that you're requesting and have any ingress, egress you need for internal and external access, whether it's other apps within the same platform, making sure that those are talking fluidly together, as well as any external traffic that's not in your network. Permissions, so this would be any non-platform related permissions, so your typical enterprise authentication and user group setup. You still have to do all of that in your source code, as well as security considerations. So I mentioned you may also have a build pipeline. The best practice is generally to abstract a lot of the security controls away from the developers and move those into your build pipeline. So you bring your auditors and your security engineers along with you as you work to build the pipelines and take in all security considerations. So what type of applications might we target for either runtime? The application runtime, this is where you're going to look at proprietary source code. So this is applications that you develop. As I mentioned, Ingrid at Acme runs a factory. So maybe we have a widget scanning app as the production comes off of the assembly line, so we can do QA checks based on barcodes or whatever it is on the packaging. So if I've got a mobile device with a mobile scanner, fully control all the source code, that would work out. You want to make sure you're looking at stateless applications in the app runtime. Your instances may die for various reasons, whether it's memory or platforms moving it around. So if you're storing state within your application instances, that is quite problematic. So as you move towards 12-factor kind of cloud native design patterns, one thing you want to be definitely concerned of as you're evaluating applications is externalizing your state, because you can have a lot of conflicts and it's difficult to unravel and debug and troubleshoot those kinds of issues once they do come into your system. So proprietary source code over which you have control, you want your state externalized from your applications, and you want some progress of the 12 factors. So the 12 factors are essentially 12 factors that are good practices around cloud native application development. You want to, as I mentioned, the stateless is a big one. There are a few others that are big, critical ones, but you can get applications deployed to the app runtime and catch yourself up on some of the externalizing configuration, logging implementations, and things like that. So container runtime, what do applications look like that we might target there? So this may be third-party or vendor proprietary software. So across an enterprise landscape, you likely have third-party packages that may be delivered to you even as Kubernetes images or VM images. Those are, those may be good candidates for the container runtime because you can just package those up and deploy them to the container runtime and not have to work with your vendors to, break down the applications, move into a cloud-native environment. They may not be capable, they may not be willing, it may not be covered in your various agreements. Also, applications where you may have proprietary source code, so source code that you own, but the business function in the application itself is relatively static, relatively unchanging. These may be things like, quarterly financial transaction or transform jobs or other application code. If it's something where you're not going to be making an investment in the code, it's relatively low velocity, low change. You may not want to make the investment to spin up software team or teams to convert the application that's already been working for years and years and may just be a part of the way that your company drives revenue. And then lastly, bespoke environments, so customized environments where you have, especially as an operators team, you may have individual teams that are talking about, we need control over memory management on the operating system layer for XYZ reason. Frankly, in a lot of applications deployed that I've seen to the Cloud Foundry ecosystem, as if you spend some time and ask a few whys to understand why the teams are looking for those more customized control on the operating system or container layer, they don't really need it. They're trying to do something functionally else. They're just used to deploying code to servers or deploying code to VMs, so it's just more of those, getting them familiar with more of the application PaaS cloud native practices. So what we're going to pick with, at least through the rest of our story, is Ingrid is going to take that factory widget scanning application and deploy it, refactor it a bit so that it is stateless, the state's externalized, and deploy it on the Cloud Foundry application runtime. So I'll let Brittany take over and talk a little bit more about that.
Awesome. So once we've decided that we are moving to the application runtime, there are a couple of things to keep in mind. First and foremost, I feel like I've been saying this my entire career, but remember, everything's a journey, right? It's not going to happen on day one. This is definitely an iterative process. The other thing to keep in mind is that as you start to move, right, you're changing your whole IT department to be more agile, and you've heard all of these different words. One of the things to keep in mind is that your business partners are also hearing a lot of buzzwords, and to keep this in check, right? So if you hear of lift and shift or forklift migrations or cloud ready or all of that, these have all been different ways that I think, various service providers have, said they could move applications. The long and the short of it is that you just want your business teams and your internal teams to know that these buzzwords are all really meaning the same thing. You just want to remember how to go about these different applications and moving them to different places. So again, in the term of moving to application runtime, we really want to make sure that you look at things, right? Refactoring an application or making it more in these 12 factors does take time. And you may say, hey, that's not agile. We want to just keep going with this. But there's a lot of questions that I think you guys need to stop, slow down, and ask your teams, right? And they're kind of here on the left-hand side, right? Do you have an unusual directory layout? Do you have, homegrown shims, or how are you connecting data sources? Is it really ugly? What about the 12-factor application process? Have your teams been studying these? Are you missing any of the 12 factors? Even now, they're going to, 14 factors. There's even more different things that people should look at. So I really encourage you to look across those various different factors within your applications and figure out which ones you are missing and why. And last but not least, what are the dependencies, right? Both internal as well as external data dependencies. And we'll get into kind of the three things that you should look at in the 12-factor. And just remember too, when we say migrate, we're really talking about these newer cloud native applications that you can easily port over, versus refactoring are more those legacy applications that you do have to kind of look at the code and kind of rebuild it and figure out how your teams can kind of move forward with this application. So the three kind of key critical factors from moving into application runtimes from all of the 12 factors, right? 12 is a really hard number to remember. I can't recite all 12 of them off my head, but I can remember three, right? And they are dependencies, configurations, and your logging, right? So we'll get really into that, but really what we mean, remember, dependencies are explicitly you declare and isolate these dependencies within an application. The configuration or config is you need to store your configs within your environment. And then your logs too, you need to treat your logging within application runtime as event streaming, right? So you really know what's going on when it touches that infrastructure. And so obviously Ingrid is paying close attention over here in the corner, but I do just want to make a quick comment. And again, you guys, I think will have these presentations, but even with the newest releases of Cloud Foundry, it's still important to take into consideration these factors and really make sure that you're allowing for the full migration to occur and to occur, correctly the first time. I can't tell you how many companies that I've talked to over the last couple of years that just don't have the right talent within their organization. So that's kind of first and foremost, right? Is that when you start building these teams and you start figuring out, okay, we want to go forward, do you have the subject matter experts within your organization to go forward? Is this something that you will have to outsource? If this is something that you think that you have and then down the road you have to kind of outsource, now you're expanding budgets in a way that you weren't predicting from the onset. So we'll get that kind of, right, again, a question list that we have here. Do we have the right talent? Is our talent aligned to, the mission? Do they believe in Cloud Foundry? If they don't think an application or a platform is going to actually ease their jobs, you need to get your whole team aligned, and this is the way that really can make them speedy, right? The other thing is, do we have all of our dependencies mapped out? Is there, third-party data sources we're not thinking about or something of that, element? Do we have and do we know our technical limits as far as, what our infrastructure can and cannot allow? And then do we also know the benefits of migrating, right? I think, as I've said before, making sure that people know what they're going to do before they do the hard work or the benefits that they're going to do can really help your whole organization with this mission all around.
And I think just one comment on the talent as well. From Ingrid's CIO's perspective, it's a lot easier if you make a conscious decision up front of where you're going to build your expertise internally versus bring in external vendors. So you're not like when you need something, something's on fire, you're trying to get something out to hit your user base. You know that, okay, we're going to build custom business logic to direct user, to reroute some of the production widgets if they have defects once we scan them, but we're not going to deal with all of the management of the VMs and infrastructure that is supporting the platform. So making those proactive choices ahead of time makes it easier when you're in the heat of the moment to make good choices.
And again, the list on the right is just a quick gut check as far as, have you looked at all of your interdependencies within this application? And oftentimes we configure different things, right? A lot of us have still homegrown configuration tooling that we use. We really recommend that you leverage the KISS principle. I don't know if are you guys familiar at all with the KISS principle? Yeah, keep it simple, stupid. It's actually something that I learned in college. It's a supply chain principle, but it really gets to the point and is something kind of cheeky that your teams might want to rethink. Is how do we make it so that we are using environment variables within our config environments and really kind of looking at how we're leveraging our external configurations. Right, and as I said, the pro tip here is to really leverage your environment variables so that you don't have to make your configurations more complicated than they need to be.
on the environment variables too, that becomes extremely important as you're going from life cycle to life cycle, right? So you're going from, maybe your CF dev environment on your laptop to a non-production environment to a production environment. Anything that you can put into environment variables, you're not going to have to be writing custom code and interpretation and have a bunch of like logic forks so that you can read the variables based on what environment or life cycle you're in, and it allows the underpinnings of that to change. So, you've probably run across configs that are relying on IP address or even DNS name or things like that. If you just inherit and pull that in from the environment, it makes it a lot easier as you go from life cycle to life cycle, environment to environment.
And then last but not least, right, is everyone just keeps saying how much data is, your kind of currency now. I'm not going to reiterate that bad analogy, but, just think about it. Like if you throw an application up into infrastructure and all of a sudden it doesn't work, you're going to need a pathway of data to figure out why that's happening, right? So your logs, your event streams become that data to really help you configure your application runtime or figure out, what went wrong. The other thing is when we get into multi-cloud environments, right, we're talking about multi-vendors. A lot of times too, when it comes to support, as we all know, a multi-vendor strategy often has us kind of, pointing fingers at different vendors, and you get stuck in kind of a support cycle. So the better that you can be about your logging and truly understand what's going on under the hood based on, what Cloud Foundry gives you in those logs, the better off you will be at being able to diagnose issues yourself as well.
And yeah, the app runtime makes it super easy. You're logging to standard out. That's best practice. One of the core 12 factors, and that makes it very easy to you get some stuff free, not just system internals, but a lot of times you can use that for like at least referential analytics. Not that you would want to be using it as your core analytics system because it's a lossy log system, but you can get some order of magnitude idea of like user errors or login patterns or other functional behaviors within your application with no additional overhead. So you don't have to worry about that analytics package. You can just scrape wherever you're dumping your logs in that storage bucket.
Awesome. So we've talked about moving our legacy applications. Ingrid is obviously into logging over there in the corner. So this last part, we'll talk about how to better take this application now that you've figured out, whether you're going to use application runtime or container runtime. Then once you kind of make the decision to go to application runtime, how should you really break up that, application into all the different pieces of dependencies, configurations, and logs, and now really talking about engaging our community.
Right. So let's say that Ingrid is here at CF Summit having a great time. It's the last day, trying to take notes and figure out what she's going to bring back to the company and the teams over which she sees. So we know we've already decided that, okay, we're probably going to be working on getting this factory widget scanning app into the application runtime. But what else? Like, so what? Why does that matter? So first, as you go back, like, and leverage Cloud Foundry, eliminate friction, but eliminate it relentlessly, right? So you hear a lot of references to the elegance and beauty of just the CF push and various other tooling that's abstracted. That will get you a lot of the way, but you have to continue pressing that line and identifying like where in your value stream are you like losing time or costing time or spending unnecessary cycles. I think just the spoiler alert, it's probably somewhere in the security area. There's always a lot of opportunities there to make that a lot more efficient. So just one piece of advice, like partner closely with those folks because you can usually squeeze a lot of efficiency out there. Two, help others. So depending on where you are in your organization in terms of the journey on Cloud Foundry and your individual role, there's going to be a lot of folks at your company that weren't able to come to this conference, like haven't seen all of the information, don't have the depth of understanding. Just be kind and help those folks out, right? So if they ask you a question and you're busy, like just take a few minutes to at least try to help them out, especially if it's something where they're struggling with understanding some of the cloud native design patterns, or especially if you see that they may be implementing something that's going to come around and cause them problems or defects in production. Just a little help desk there. And then also don't do that just within your immediate zone, but look outside your sphere, especially with a lot of the tools that we have in the enterprise today as far as Google Hangouts and Slack and HipChat and all the other, always on kind of chat providers, there's a lot of opportunity to reach not just to your functional area or your immediate team, but, into a different organization, into a different vertical, spend some time with them, develop that empathy, try to understand where their pain points and friction points are, and help others that you don't normally talk to day to day.
I would also say too, like as far as Sphere, oftentimes we kind of get stuck within our own industry, but if you are someone that talks across different industries, you realize how similar a lot of these problems are. So there may not be someone in your particular area or industry, but you could kind of open that up to see what other challenges are very similar, right, within different industries. So I would encourage you to look across that too.
And then share, as you're going through the journey, share your successes and your failures. Like don't try to cover up and hide when things go wrong or where you have problems or defects or issues, right? Share those, do thorough postmortems, ask the 5 whys, and try to understand and let other people know that it's okay to fail. So like as a specific example, an application that I deployed on Cloud Foundry took down a significant amount of users as it came up because we had centralized a configuration that had been distributed locally to mobile devices for deployment efficiency reasons. We ended up centralizing the config, and when all the mobile devices lit up, they couldn't download the new config. So we were in a kind of a troubleshooting Sev 0, Sev 1 mode for probably 30 to 45 minutes before we could get that worked out. We didn't see any subsequent issues, but things like that, just own them and explain, like do postmortems, understand what went wrong and why, and share those with others so that they feel comfortable and encouraged to kind of push the boundaries and push outside their boxes and spheres as well. And then, so as a wrap up, we kind of talked loosely through Ingrid's story of, getting into the Cloud Foundry ecosystem, how to select application or container runtimes, what makes sense to run where. Brittany talked a bit about like the specifics of moving legacy applications, migrating, refactoring, and the 12 factors. And then also just, again, encourage you to engage your community as you go back and spread this information across your companies. That's all we have. So any questions from folks?
Our Twitter handles are at the bottom. We also run a podcast together that's called Life in the Clouds .dev. If you guys are ever interested, and yeah, we'll be here for a few minutes if you have any questions. Thank you guys so much.